Welcome. In this demo, we're going to demonstrate how to install the GroupWise Ascot. We've got a SLES 10 SP3 server with Apache and Tomcat pre-installed. We've got eDirectory and Console 1 also pre-installed. Ready to begin. We've got our Ascot software DVD loaded. We're just going to select it to bring it up. I can either do this from a terminal or I can do this from Nautilus. So I'll just launch from Nautilus. Looking at the contents of the DVD, we see our install files. I'm just going to double click on the installation script and we'll just ask to run that script. We need to use the root password in order to do the install, so we need to be root user. Type in the password and the installer will launch. Again, I'll select OK to install in English. You'll notice that the branding has changed a little bit for Ascot. We've got coloring changes as well as a couple of the icon changes. Menu has pretty much stayed the same. We've got view the README, view the quick start, view the installation guide, create or update a GroupWise system, or install individual products. If I select the individual products, I'm left with administration, agents, web access, monitor, calendar publishing, and the internet agent. You'll notice that there is no GroupWise client for Linux or Mac. I'll just go back one screen. We're going to do the create or update a GroupWise system because that does everything all at once for us. We're going to go through the steps that we have on the left-hand side here. Intro, agree to our license, install our software distribution directory, select the software, install and copy files, and then we're ready to create or update a system and finish off. This will install the MTA and the POA, or the domain and post office, and we'll have a separate install for the internet agent at a later time. So select Next, accept the license agreement. Always preferable that you read the license agreement first, then select Next. Default directory where the software distribution directory will go is OpNovel GroupWise software. Typically you'll have hopefully a secondary device, probably your SAN of sorts, and you've got a mounted partition under, I call my directory mail, so under mail software, that's where I'm going to place my software distribution directory. And I say Next. The software that we want to install to the software distribution directory, well, we want to actually have pretty much everything here. So again, we're going to select all of the software, again, the Linux agents, the administration files, including software distribution directory, internet agent, web access, calendar publishing host, and GroupWise monitor. Again, you'll notice there is no client software for Linux. Select Next. It will proceed to a copy phase, and once the copy phase is done, we'll come back and finish off the install. Now that the file copy is complete, we can carry on to the next step. Now we're posed with the question of, do we want to create a new GroupWise system or update an existing one? The default is update, so we want to actually go and change that to create a new one. Select Next. At this point, it's going to ask us to click Run to launch Console 1 and set up the GroupWise Advisor wizard to create our GroupWise system. So we're going to do that now. Click Run. Wait for Console 1 to load. Default is with the new snap-ins for GroupWise is the first question is asked us to confirm the Linux mount directory, so we select OK on /mnt, and then we get a advisory to, after authenticating the directory tree, you need to go into the GroupWise system, select the GroupWise tools, and then GroupWise utilities, and then create new system. Select OK to that. We're going to need to authenticate, so authenticate as the admin account, somebody with supervisory rights to the root object, because we will need to extend the eDirectory schema. And prior to going to our tools menu, let's go and select help about snap-ins, and let's verify the snap-in version. So GroupWise administration here, we'll see that is the version for Ascot beta. So we know we've got the right versions. We know that the administration files have been updated, so are installed. Select OK. I'm going to select my GroupWise system, select tools, utilities, and new system. Now it brings up the setup advisor. So now it's going to ask us to collect GroupWise information or system information, create that system, and then install our agent software. We'll select Next. Again, it's just going to ask us to confirm the location of the software distribution directory, so our mail software that we created earlier. And now it's going to ask us about the eDirectory tree that we want to extend the schema for. So we're going to add our eDirectory objects to the DA-tree. We're just going to select Next on that. It does give us a list of the attributes for the schema extension that we need to add either to existing objects or adding new objects. So we add new classes or new attributes, and we see those going by. So I'm going to click the box to say yes to extend it. Again, being logged in as admin for the eDirectory tree allows me to extend the schema. Select next to let that happen. Now it's going to ask us for the GroupWise system name. Again, Digital Airlines GroupWise, so we'll just give that a DAGW. Select next. Again, all system names must be unique on the wire. A domain name, so our primary domain is going to be called SLC.dom for our Salt Lake City domain. We're going to select next. The file directory, again, we're going to use that same mail partition that I have, and we're going to just use the same name for that, SLC.dom. Select next. Context where we want to create. We're going to create that in our SLC. So I'm just using the navigator for the select object. Select OK. Next. The language, English, the time zone, Mountain Time Zone. And now we're asked for the post office information. So SLC PO will be its name. Again, the directory will use the same structure, mail/SLC PO. So all of our mail components will be in the same file structure. And again, the context, it uses the same context as a parent domain and the same language and time zone. We'll just accept the defaults. Now it's going to ask us about the link. So how does the MTA talk to the post office? So we'll talk about communications. We're going to use a TCP/IP link versus a direct link. A direct link is mapped or UNC versus TCP/IP under the TCP/IP link. Select next. Server's address is 172.17.6.23. You could also use the DNS host name. Default ports for client server at the post office is 1677. MTP port is 7101. Communications between the MTA and the POA, and HTTP port is 7181 for the web administration console. Select next. Now the MTA address, 172.17.6.23 again. And again, the message transfer port inbound is 7100 and 7180 for the web administration port. Select next. We're not going to add users at this point. Default configuration of the post office is to use high security, which means users need a post office. So if I would add users now, they would not have a defaulted password for GroupWise, therefore they wouldn't be able to log in. So we'll just add our users in as a task later. So we'll select next on that. Now we're ready to create the system. I'm going to select next. We do have an opportunity to review and back if we needed to make any changes. Just a quick review. Everything looks good. We select next. It's going to go in and create the objects in the directory tree, create the file system and the file structures and all of the files associated with the post office, then copy the view files over to that post office directory, and then we'll be ready to install the agents. So select next, and we'll wait while the installation happens. It could take a few minutes. So the GroupWise system was successfully installed. Now we're ready to continue on. Next step will be to install the agent file. So we're talking about MTA and the POA. So let's select next. Again, just confirmation of the installing the agent software. It will bring up the installer. So now it's going to install the MTA, the POA, and the document viewer agent. So this component, document viewer agent, has been removed from the web access agent, which no longer exists in Ascot, which we'll talk about later when we talk about web access. So the document viewer agent is now a process that actually allows us to process those attachments that go with web access, and it will be installed at this point. I'm going to select next. It will ask me to confirm and enable the document viewer agent, and we will enable it since we will be installing web access later, but it could also be installed later. And now it's just asking us to, do we want to launch the agents on system startup, which means it will then make the agents start in run levels 3 and 5, and I'll show you how to confirm that in a second. And I select exit. And as far as the installation for the MTA and the POA, we are done. Now let's just go through a couple of things here. I'll expand the GroupWise system. We see we now have our primary domain SLC.dom, and we have our post office SLC PO. Remember, we do not have any users yet. So prior to adding users, we're going to actually just start up the system, make sure that everything is functional first. So let's just minimize all of our installers. Actually, go to that. I'm going to open up a terminal window, and I'm going to become the root user. So I'm just going to switch user, super user, root user's password. And what I'm going to do is to verify the run levels, if I do a chk config, so check config, and our script is grpwise, and if I do a -L for listing, it'll show us that the run levels 3 and 5 are turned on, so we know that they're actually there. Let's start the agents, but we'll start them with the GUI interface, so that way we actually get to see them running. If there are any errors, we would see any errors come on screen, as opposed to if we try to run them just from the script without the GUI interfaces, we won't really know if we without going to the log files. So I'm going to switch over to the agent executable directory. So it's changing directory to the /opt novell GroupWise agents bin. I'm also using tab completion to help me get there quickly. Select that. I'm going to, if I do a listing, we'll see our agent files. So we have our GW-MTA, GW-POA files, as well as our DCA and our DVA files. So we see that our scripts are there. We'll see our GroupWise script. So I'm going to launch. So I'm going to do ./GW-MTA. I'm going to use a --show switch that says give me the GUI interface. And I'm just going to point to the SLC-DOM-MTA configuration file, which is in our under the agents share directory. So I just need to back up one directory and go down one, and I'm going to use the ampersand to have it as a background process so that I get actually access to the terminal window once it's running. We'll launch that off. We see the new branding come up, and we see our SLC DOM has now been launched. There are a couple of restarts that happened. There is a conversion of the databases from GroupWise 5.5 to the new version that we're running with Ascot. So if I select enter, now I want to do the same thing, and we're going to run the POA file. So ./GWPOA --show and launch the configuration file with the SLC-PO.POA with the ampersand for the background process. And I'm just making double checking, and we're good. I'm going to launch that, and we'll see again the branding has changed for the startup screen, and we'll see that over here on the MTA. We notice that we now have it now opened. There'll be some administrative messages that are going to cross the screen on the POA in a second, so we'll know that things are communicating. It does take a few moments, but we should see some administrative messages start to come across the POA. But it looks like both of them are up, so the MTA and the POA. And you may notice up here we got messages that are actually arriving into that. So there are some configuration changes that are taking place. At this point, our logging is not verbose. That's the default, is just normal, so we may not see very much come across the screen, but there might be a few messages. So once it's up and running, we're ready to go do a couple of configuration changes in preparation for adding our users. So I'm going to bring up console 1 again. So a couple of things here. I'm going to highlight my domain. I'm going to switch over to the message transfer agent, and a couple of things I want to do here is I'm going to go into the agent settings, and we're going to set a HTTP user because we really want to have the ability to log into the admin web page, and we like it password protected. So I'm just going to use the same password that we have for all of our accounts. And I'm also going to go in here before I apply that. I'm going to change the log setting to verbose. And I think we're good with the rest of that. And actually message logging as well. May as well just turn that on for logging of messages passing through the domain. I'll hit apply, and we can close that. And then we'll go to the post office agent. And again, we'll do the same thing. We're going to go into the agent settings. We're going to scroll down. We'll add GW agent. Again, set that same password. Set. Now we'll set that. Again, we'll go in here. We'll go in here and change the log settings to verbose again for all of the happenings at the post office. I'll go back to agent settings. Another thing you may want to do initially is the SOAP protocol is disabled by default. You may want to turn that one on by default now. With all the third-party applications that connect into the post office, whether you're using our data synchronizer, which also uses the SOAP connector through the GroupWise connectors, that we want to be able to talk to the post office, and also web access will now use SOAP to communicate with the post office as opposed to going through the web access agent. So you might want to consider turning that one on initially. So, but we'll come back and we'll do that one later. So I'm just going to apply this now. We do get a message about having SSL not enabled for client server. We're just not going to pay attention to that. We're just going to select no. There's twice to that. If I go back to the POA, we will see some administrative changes come across the POA at some point. The logging will change. Now we're going to start seeing all of the processing of those admin messages. Well, we're waiting for that to happen now. I'm going to go in and set the default password. So under Tools, GroupWise System Operations, System Preferences, there is a default password, and since the post office has high security, it is required to have a password for users. So I'm going to put in a default password of N0V3LL123. That's our super funky novel password, as we call it, for all of our accounts. I'm going to select OK. So now any users I add into the environment are going to get that password initially, and at least be able to log in, and then they can change their passwords after. So now let's add those users to the post office. Let's select SLCPO as the post office. I'm now going to go to its properties, and under that we can go and add the memberships. So right now there are no users, so I'm going to add. I'm going to go to my users container. I'm just going to select everybody here. I'm going to select OK, and it's going to add all of these users to the post office once I hit apply. You may or may not get a notification about changing email addresses depending on what you already have in your environment, if you have the field, the email address field populated or not. I'm just going to click OK. Here I am getting a couple of changes here. So I'm just going to say yes to those changes for the email addressing. I think there's 4 or 5 of them that are changing. And now if I switch my account here, I now notice that I have all of my users are now part of the post office. And if I minimize console 1, we'll see we've got administrative asks, we've got ads happening, so we're adding in the users to the environment, and we're ready to go. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to terminate the agents from the graphical environment. So just shutting those down. It'll take a moment or two. And we'll shut down the MTA as well. And then once they're shut down, we'll restart them without the graphical interfaces, and we'll just test that they're up and running. While the shutdown happens. All right, now that the system is shut down, I'm back in my terminal window. Again, so if I want to verify the agents if they're running, I'm going to just clear my screen here to get a clean screen. I could either do it from the scripts. To do that, I can either go into the etc init.d directory, or I can use the symbolic link. So we have an RCGRPWise symbolic links, and I can say, let's take a look at the status, and we'll see that our agents are unused at this point. Our SLCPO and SLC-DOM, the DVA is not being used at this time. And now if I want to start them, I just do an RCGRPWise start, and that will start my agents up, including the DVA, the document viewer agent, and now my domain and post offices are up. And I'm just going to use the up arrow and verify the status again, and now we see that all 3 components are now running. So this concludes the installation of a basic GroupWise system, the MTA, the POA, and the document viewer agent. In another video, we'll do the GroupWise Internet agent.